Is there one thing right now where the Raptors may not look vulnerable on paper, but come playoff time, that could become a real issue depending on the matchup?
Yeah, I think with the nature of the playoffs, what I would look to is their ability to get out in transition. Right now, they're second in the league. 18.6% of the time, they're able to create transition opportunities. And when you think of the playoffs, the way the game slows down, the tempo of the game, teams are going to be in their half-court offense. How often are you actually going to be able to create those live ball turnovers and get out and create those transition opportunities? That's something that I will be paying attention to. And frankly, on the other side of it, part of why it's such a big advantage is because they are so good in limiting transition as well. They are the best in the league at limiting transition. So, that comes down to a combo of their offensive rebounding and getting back. And I just think in the half-court nature of the playoffs where teams maybe, they won't even look to get on the offensive glass as much. They'll have players back. And so you won't be able to have a numbers advantage. You won't be able to get out as much. I think that's something where now if you're forced to play in the half-court even more, that creates some real problems.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was looking at too. Is that I trust the Raptors defense. I think really the only thing for me is I do see that specific matchups. I don't know what the Raptors are going to do. Like with Embiid, no one's going to stop Embiid, for example, right? We know that. Mm-hmm. Even when the Raptors had Marc Gasol and Serge Ibaka and Kawhi and Pascal, no one's going to stop Joel Embiid. But the key to slowing him down and keeping him in check is you need two things. One, you need really great help defense around him. Double team him from different parts of the floor, swipe at the ball, force him to pick it up, force him to reset. The Raptors actually have that portion down pretty well with what Fred can do as a help defender, with what Gary can do as a help defender, Pascal. These guys could, these guys can come over and help. The other issue, though, is, and maybe the more fundamental part is, you need a huge body to at least hold Embiid in place for 2-3 seconds before that help can come. And that's the issue where the Raptors don't have. That block, because that's what Mark did, right? Mark can, if Embiid wanted to face up, Raptors weren't double teaming as much because, he had more options to pass to. It's more risky doubling a guy facing up because they can make the passes a lot easier. They can see the rest of the floor. When he was backing down, especially on the baseline, that's where the Raptors always send help for Mark. At least Mark can sort of hold Embiid, though, right? Keep him on the perimeter, make him shoot the jumper. Back then, Embiid wasn't shooting the jumper nearly as well. Plus, he had a stomach flu or whatever. So there was many factors that went into that. But the key thing is the Raptors don't even have that other block, right? Whether you're talking about, Chris Boucher trying to hold his position against Embiid in the post, whether it's Precious trying to hold his position in the post, that's a problem. That's a huge problem. And the same, and I guess Giannis is the other part that's more concern to me. Although with Giannis, he likes to start his moves on the perimeter. So the Raptors have done a great job of walling him off. Obviously, the Raptors have swept the Bucks this season 3-0. I'm less concerned about that matchup, but the Embiid matchup is something I'm concerned with. But quite honestly, I look at most teams in the East. Most teams don't have the requisite piece, those two pieces to stop Embiid. I don't think most teams in the NBA even have that. So.
Yeah, and that's where, depending on if the Raptors don't do anything, you have to look internally and say, in that series, Khem Birch becomes really, really important, right? He doesn't have the size of, some of the giants that we talk about in the league, but he has the strength. He is as strong as they come. And so I think, if you have a guy like him who can buy you that little bit of time, when Embiid's on the block to get that help involved, I think that's where, you can swing those possessions just ever so slightly in your favor.
Yeah. I guess the other portion to look at is also just if we look at just the team construction, right? So we know where the spots are where the Raptors have the least depth, right? I would say they have, by position, their center position is the weakest. I think that's quite clear. But they actually have many centers. There's just none of them are standout, clear-cut starting level centers. That's why they start without a center.
Right.
Where they have the least depth is clearly in the guard positions. Fred is the only point guard, although the depth there is less of a concern when Pascal's around because clearly he's elevated his point play to the point where you don't need to put a point guard out with him. He can still be effective, right? So that's less of a concern. but shooting guard. It's Gary and then nothing else.
Right.
That worries me. So that's where, again, if you're looking at some of the Raptors' issues in terms of the offensive creation, to be honest, offensive creation is the easiest skill to find in guards.
Yeah.
There should be abundance of these. So that's where I think the Raptors could definitely use some help there. And, I think I've been pretty consistent on this. Yes, I think the Raptors can get a center. I think especially for different matchups, even just for scenarios where, you don't want Precious closing out in the fourth quarter because he's not shooting the free throws well, or, you worry about him, his ability to make plays for you in really, really tough games, right? Especially his finishing. You worry about Boucher because, yes, he's effective in two big lineups, but as the only big, we've seen him also get taken advantage of. So I think upgrading at center just always makes sense, period. But that's where, though, the more likely move is you get another guard. You get a third guard. That's the thing that's been missing for the Raptors all season. I think, really, to wrap up this portion, before we just move on to some of the rumors out there right now in the rumor mill a day before the trade deadline, is just if you look at the bigger picture of what can the Raptors do to get that next disgruntled star, if they were going to make the next Kawhi trade, right? Do they have the pieces for that right now, in your opinion? And honestly, do they even necessarily need to? Because with Pascal emerging with his play like this, with Scotty Barnes just waiting in the wings, maybe they don't necessarily even need to, prepare for that style of trade. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point that you hit on, because if Pascal is at this level, and you look at the way Scotty Barnes has progressed over the course of the season, Bobby Webster saying, hey, this guy seems to grow week to week, right? And sometimes game to game. And if he can continue that trajectory, if he's at the level that you need, if he's, say, for example, at an all-NBA level in a couple of years, then you have that star, right? And you've got talent all the way through the roster where you could potentially have, between Fred VanVleet and Pascal Siakam and Scotty Barnes and OG Anunoby, you could potentially have 4 top 50 guys in your starting lineup, right? And I think that becomes a position of strength for the Raptors. Now, one thing that sort of gets tossed around is OG Anunoby's name. And I think with him, it's easy to sort of put him in there because, we kind of, by default, we go to the guy that isn't maybe as important. We become prisoners of the moment, right? Like last season when Pascal was struggling, all of a sudden the conversation becomes, okay, how can OG become the number one guy? Now Pascal is back in his role and doing his thing, and it becomes, okay, what can we get for OG? But I think we saw just how valuable OG Anunoby is when he was out with the hip pointer. And you talk about depth, and all of a sudden when you're losing those OG minutes and you're going to Svi Mykhailiuk and Yuta Watanabe, and the drop-off is staggering, right?
Staggering, yeah.
Yeah, and then you see OG come back, and over the past week, defend everyone from Vucevic to DeRozan to Jimmy Butler, gets minutes on Bam. Like
Trae Young, 2 blocks.
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah,
his value is immense to this team. And again, being that third guy, being that fourth guy is just a tough thing to do offensively, but I think he's really rounding into that. And so I think the Raptors are right in sort of, we've seen reports out there that they're not looking to do anything that touches the top 5, that starting group. And I think they're right to believe that because Gary Trent, that's probably the guy. If you were to say, what's a piece you're willing to sacrifice and then throw in future pieces to get a big name, that's the guy that is probably the most likely, I would say.